The office echoed with silence until a sharp crash split the air. Papers scattered like broken wings as Emily dropped the report she had worked on for months. Her chest tightened, breath ragged, as her manager's voice pierced the air. Mr. Harris said, "This is unacceptable." His tone cut deeper than any blade. Emily, gripping the edge of the desk, felt the room shrink. Years of being overlooked, of swallowing words, seemed to collapse onto her shoulders. She whispered to herself, "Why does it always feel like I'm invisible until I fail?" Colleagues turned their heads, some with pity, others with indifference. Every gaze felt like a weight pressing her deeper into the ground. Emily's palms burned as tears threatened but never fell. Inside, anger mixed with shame, a storm she had hidden too long. The room blurred, voices overlapping, but one truth screamed louder than all. She could no longer stay silent. Something inside cracked open, raw and painful, yet alive. Emily walked quickly down the corridor, her breath uneven. The echoes of Mr. Harris' words clung to her skin like ash. She muttered, "Why do I always let them define me?" Her shoes clicked on polished tiles, each step heavier than the last. Passing glass walls, she glimpsed her reflection, tired eyes, shoulders bent, a stranger staring back. She remembered her mother's voice, long ago, telling her she had to fight twice as hard to be seen. The weight of that truth pressed harder now. She reached the stairwell, gripping the cold railing, feeling her pulse race. For a moment, she wanted to run and never look back. Yet something inside her whispered that fleeing wasn't an option anymore. She tightened her grip and inhaled deeply, a fragile act of resistance. The stairwell was empty, shadows stretching long against concrete walls. Emily sat on the bottom step, hugging her knees tightly. Her whisper echoed, "I'm so tired of being invisible." Her voice cracked under the weight of years of silence. She remembered countless times when her ideas had been dismissed, her efforts unnoticed. Each memory burned now, layering into a fire she could no longer contain. The world outside the stairwell carried on, indifferent. But within the stillness, Emily realized her silence had been her prison. She pressed her forehead to her knees, tears finally slipping free. Yet even through the ache, her heart whispered a truth she feared. Change required courage, and courage demanded risk. Later that afternoon, Emily returned to her desk, shoulders heavier but eyes sharper. The atmosphere in the office remained cold, whispers circling like smoke. A colleague glanced her way, then quickly back to their screen. Emily's heart pounded, but she forced herself to sit upright. She muttered, "They won't break me again." The pile of unfinished work stared back at her, mocking, yet it became a challenge. Her hands trembled as she picked up the pen, but her strokes grew steadier with each line. Beneath the surface, a quiet fire flickered. It wasn't strength yet, but it was survival. That night, Emily walked home beneath a bruised sky. Streetlights flickered against cracked sidewalks. She carried her bag tightly, feeling the world's weight in its straps. "Tomorrow has to be different," she whispered. The city moved around her, cars rushing, strangers passing, but she felt suspended in her own storm. The failures of the day gnawed at her, yet within the ache a new determination coiled. She had been broken before, but she had never fully risen. Tonight, she vowed quietly, not for anyone else, but for herself, that her silence would no longer be her cage. The next morning, Emily walked into the office with her stomach twisted in knots. The echoes of yesterday still lingered, but she forced her chin higher. Mr. Harris' cold stare met her the moment she entered, and his voice rang sharp. Mr. Harris said, "You're late with the revision again." Her heart raced, and for a moment she froze, but then she forced her breath steady. She replied softly, "I'll get it done." The words tasted like defeat, but they bought her time. Around her, colleagues typed loudly, their faces void of concern, some glancing sideways at her as if waiting for her to crumble. Emily clenched her fists under the desk, whispering in her mind, "Not today." The pressure was suffocating, yet the stubborn fire in her chest flickered alive again. At lunch, Emily sat alone at a corner table in the cafeteria, her tray untouched. The room buzzed with chatter, laughter, and the clinking of cutlery, but none of it reached her. She stared at her reflection in a spoon, feeling like a ghost in her own story. Her colleague Daniel approached, dropping into the seat across from her. Daniel said, "You can't keep letting him crush you." Emily looked up, startled by his bluntness. His eyes carried something unexpected, empathy mixed with irritation. She whispered, "I don't know if I can fight back." Daniel leaned forward, voice slow but sharp. Daniel said, "You can, you just don't believe it yet." His words stung, but they lodged deep inside her chest, refusing to be ignored. That evening, Emily sat by her apartment window, the city's neon glow spilling across her face. She clutched her journal, pages filled with half-finished thoughts and abandoned dreams. She whispered, "Why am I so afraid to be seen?" The hum of traffic below reminded her that life moved forward, whether she did or not. She scribbled words with trembling hands, forcing herself to capture the storm inside. Each line grew heavier, darker, until she slammed the pen down, chest heaving. She pressed her forehead to the glass, tears finally falling. Yet deep inside, Daniel's words echoed. She hated that he was right. She couldn't keep hiding behind silence, even if the thought terrified her more than failure itself. The following day, Emily walked into a meeting, where Mr. Harris dominated the room with his voice. She sat quietly at the edge of the table, words clawing at her throat, but never reaching her lips. Mr. Harris pointed to a chart and said, "This is what failure looks like." Emily felt her face burn as colleagues shifted uncomfortably. Daniel shot her a glance across the table, eyes sharp, silently urging her to speak. Her heart pounded against her ribs. She opened her mouth but shut it again, fear choking her. Shame wrapped around her like a heavy cloak. Still, Daniel's unwavering look stayed fixed on her, a silent reminder that silence was also a choice. Late that night, Emily stood on her apartment balcony, the city alive beneath her. The cool breeze brushed her skin, carrying whispers of possibility. She clutched the railing, her knuckles white, whispering, "I can't keep living small." Memories of every humiliation pressed on her, but instead of crushing her, they formed a strange kind of fuel. The silence of the night offered no answers, only space to hear her own voice at last. For the first time, she didn't shrink from it. She inhaled deeply, exhaled slowly, and felt the faintest spark of defiance bloom in her chest. She wasn't ready yet, but she was no longer entirely broken. Emily entered the office the next morning with a fragile determination, but the moment she saw Mr. Harris already waiting near her desk, her confidence wavered. He said, "I don't see progress, only excuses." His words stung like salt on wounds. She forced herself to meet his eyes, but her voice faltered. Emily said, "I'm working on it." He turned away with a dismissive scoff, leaving her hollow. The whispers from colleagues buzzed louder. Every keystroke in the room magnified her humiliation. She clenched her fists beneath the desk, her nails digging into her palms, whispering under her breath, "I can't keep living this way." The fight inside her flickered against a tide of fear, but for the first time, she did not let it die. Later that day, Daniel found Emily in the hallway, her eyes red from holding back tears. He leaned against the wall, voice casual yet cutting. Daniel said, "You're letting him win every time you stay quiet." Emily bristled at his bluntness, but couldn't deny the truth in his words. She said, "You think it's that simple, you don't know what it costs me." His gaze softened slightly, though his tone stayed firm. Daniel said, "I know fear, Emily. But fear doesn't disappear, you move through it." Her heart thudded painfully at his words. The weight of years of silence pressed down, but in Daniel's voice, she heard a challenge she could no longer ignore. That evening, Emily sat at her kitchen table, a mug of untouched tea cooling by her side. The journal lay open again, her handwriting shaky but urgent. She wrote, "If I stay silent, I'll never escape this cage." Her chest ached, but the act of writing felt like tearing open old wounds. She whispered, "What if I fail again?" The apartment hummed with the quiet of night, broken only by the city sounds outside her window. The silence forced her to face herself, and she realized failure already lived with her every day she chose silence. Thought terrified her, yet it lit a spark. Her pen moved with new force across the page, as though writing her own rebellion. The next morning's meeting was tense. Emily sat quietly at first, her throat dry as Mr. Harris spoke over everyone. He slammed a folder down, declaring, "This is why nothing gets done here." She flinched but felt Daniel's eyes on her again, urging without words. Her chest pounded, fear wrapping tightly, yet she inhaled. For a moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. She opened her mouth but froze, the words trapped by her old chains. Shame flushed through her, and she bit her lip hard enough to sting. Still, beneath the shame, she felt anger rise, not just at him, but at herself for shrinking. It was the first time she admitted she was complicit in her silence. That night, Emily sat on her bed, the city lights spilling faintly through the curtains. She hugged her knees, rocking slightly, her body heavy with exhaustion. She whispered, "I keep failing to speak. Maybe I'm not strong enough." Her words dissolved in the quiet, but as she stared at the ceiling, she remembered Daniel's blunt truth. Fear would never vanish. Her fists clenched around the blanket. Tears slid across her cheeks, but for the first time they didn't feel like surrender. They felt like release. She whispered again, softer but firmer, "Tomorrow will be different." The words were fragile, yet they carried a weight of promise. Somewhere inside she began to believe them. The next morning, Emily stepped into the office, but her heart felt heavier than before. Mr. Harris wasted no time in targeting her again. He said, "Your work reflects a lack of commitment." His words struck her deeper this time because she felt them echo something older, something she had heard before at home growing up. Her father's voice rose unbidden in her mind, cold and sharp, reminding her of the nights he called her a disappointment. Her chest tightened as past and present collided. She gripped the desk and whispered to herself, "I can't keep carrying their voices." Yet the shame still threatened to crush her. She realized she wasn't only fighting Harris, she was fighting every voice that told her she wasn't enough. That night at her apartment, Emily sat on the floor surrounded by old boxes she had avoided for years. She pulled out a folder of school reports, her father's handwriting scrawled in red ink on the margins. "Not good enough," it read, words like scars across her memory. Her throat burned as tears blurred the page. She whispered, "I carried this all my life." The silence of her small apartment wrapped around her, heavy but clarified. For the first time she let herself feel the raw hurt she had buried under years of silence. Her pain wasn't only about Harris, it was about every moment she believed she wasn't worthy of being seen. The following day, Emily walked into the office carrying a different kind of weight. As she sat at her desk, Daniel approached and glanced at her face. His voice was steady but sharp. Daniel said, "You look like someone who finally saw the truth." She looked up at him, startled, and whispered, "I've been living with their voices, not mine." For a moment his expression softened, then he said, "Then maybe it's time you let yours be louder." The words clung to her like an anchor. Her chest still ached with old wounds, but for the first time, she realized silence had been her cage, not her shield. That afternoon, in another tense meeting, Mr. Harris singled Emily out again, his voice booming across the room. Mr. Harris said, "This kind of incompetence drags the whole team down." The words cut deep, but this time, instead of shrinking, she looked straight at him. Her pulse hammered, but she felt the fire surge. She whispered inside, "Not my father. Not anymore." She wanted to speak, yet the words tangled on her tongue, fear still gripping her throat. But unlike before, she didn't look away. Daniel's gaze met hers from across the table, a silent reminder that silence itself was now her greatest enemy. That evening, Emily stood before her mirror at home, the quiet hum of the city drifting in from outside. She touched her reflection, whispering, "I am not what they said I was." The weight of years seemed to pour off her shoulders as she finally confronted the face she had avoided for so long. She saw fear, yes, but also something else, resilience she had never acknowledged. Her chest tightened, but it wasn't suffocating. It was power gathering, waiting to be used. She whispered again, "Tomorrow, I will speak." The words felt foreign yet liberating, a vow carved into her heart. For the first time she believed it might be possible. The next morning's meeting was tense from the start. Mr. Harris stood at the front, his tone icy as he tore apart the team's work. Then, suddenly, he turned his focus on Emily. Mr. Harris said, "You've been nothing but a burden since the start." Gasps rippled through the room. Emily's chest tightened, shame threatening to pull her under. But this time, her anger surged. She whispered no more. When he demanded, she defended herself. Her voice trembled, but rose. Emily said, "I've done more for this project than you'll admit." The words shocked her colleagues, and herself. Her voice cracked, but the truth in it was undeniable. For the first time, silence was broken. The room fell silent after her words, but Daniel leaned forward with a faint smirk, breaking the tension. Daniel said, "She's right. Maybe you should stop pretending her work means nothing." The shock widened across the table. Mr. Harris' glare shot to Daniel, but for once he didn't seem in control. Emily's knees shook, yet she felt a strange strength rooting her. For years she thought no one saw her, yet here was Daniel, forcing Harris to face the truth. Emily whispered inside, "I'm not alone anymore." For the first time her silence hadn't been met with emptiness, but with an ally. After the meeting, Emily stepped into the hallway, her legs trembling beneath her. She pressed her back against the wall, heart racing from the confrontation. Daniel followed, his voice low but firm. Daniel said, "That was the first time I saw you fight back." Emily exhaled sharply, whispering, "It felt like ripping chains off my chest." His eyes softened with quiet approval. Daniel said, "Then don't stop now." Her body was still shaking, but in that moment she realized something shocking. The fear hadn't destroyed her. It had made her stronger. That night, Emily sat at her desk at home, papers spread out before her. For years she had written her pain in silence, but now her pen moved differently. She scribbled fiercely, rewriting the day in bold words. She whispered, "I said it. I finally said it." Her heart swelled with a mix of terror and pride. She thought of her father's harsh words, of Harris's cruelty, and realized she had carried those voices for too long. Tonight, she vowed they would no longer define her. Her voice, fragile but real, had broken through. It was her revelation. The following morning, Emily entered the office with her head held higher. She carried not just her bag but the weight of a revelation. Her voice had power, even if it shook. Colleagues glanced at her differently, curiosity replacing indifference. Mr. Harris avoided her gaze, and that small shift felt monumental. Daniel passed by and said quietly, "You're finally starting to see yourself." Her lips curved into the faintest smile. She whispered, "Yes, I am." For the first time, she felt the ground beneath her steady, not crumbling. The revelation wasn't that others had kept her small. It was that she had the power all along to step into the light. The day of the big presentation arrived, the project Emily had poured her heart into. The conference room buzzed with anticipation as clients gathered, and Mr. Harris stood ready to dominate the floor. Emily's palms were damp, but Daniel caught her eye from across the table and gave the smallest nod. Mr. Harris began speaking, but when he dismissed Emily's slides with a wave of his hand, something inside her snapped. She rose, voice unsteady but clear. Emily said, "These results are mine, and I'll present them." The room stilled, all eyes on her. Harris froze, shock flickering across his face. Her heart hammered, but she refused to sit back down. Emily took control of the projector, her hands trembling as she clicked through slides. Her voice cracked at first, but each word grew stronger as she spoke about the team's efforts, the strategies she designed, and the results they achieved. She said, "Our growth isn't an accident. It's the result of deliberate choices and relentless work. Murmurs of approval rippled through the clients. Harris shifted in his seat, his power slipping as the spotlight turned to her. Emily's fear was still there, but it fueled her now instead of caging her. Every word felt like breaking a chain that had bound her for years. Halfway through, a client leaned forward, clearly impressed, and asked a direct question. Emily's chest tightened, panic threatening to rise, but she forced herself to breathe. She said, "That's a valid concern, and here's how we addressed it." Her answer was confident, rooted in her own work. Silence followed, then nods of agreement spread across the room. Harris clenched his jaw, clearly unsettled. Daniel smirked faintly, his arms crossed, pride clear in his expression. Emily realized she wasn't just surviving the moment. She was commanding it. The power she had hidden for years was finally visible, undeniable, and her voice rang steady. As Emily concluded, the clients broke into applause. She blinked, stunned, the sound almost unreal. Mr. Harris forced a smile, but his clenched fists betrayed him. For years she had lived in his shadow, silenced and dismissed, but now he couldn't erase her voice. Daniel leaned toward her and whispered, "That's what happens when you stop hiding." Emily's breath shook, but her smile grew fragile yet fierce. She felt something unshakable inside her shift. She no longer belonged to silence. Her voice had broken free, and it was louder than the doubts that had haunted her for years. That evening, Emily walked out of the office into the golden glow of sunset. Her body was exhausted, yet her spirit soared. She whispered, "I did it. I finally did it." The city stretched before her, no longer a blur but alive with possibility. For the first time she felt not like an outsider, but like someone who had claimed her space. The years of doubt had not vanished, but they no longer defined her. She inhaled deeply, the air sharp and sweet, and allowed herself a rare smile. This was more than a victory over Harris. It was a victory over the chains that had bound her all her life. Morning arrived with a calm Emily had never felt inside these walls. Keyboards clattered, phones rang, and yet the noise no longer pierced her skin. She arranged her notes with steady hands and let her breathing settle. Emily said, "I choose how today defines me." A familiar ache tugged at her ribs, but it no longer ruled her. Daniel crossed the aisle and gave a quiet nod that felt like a handshake to her courage. She remembered the first day she had hidden behind silence. That day seemed distant now, like a fog burned away by sun. Fear still lingered at the edges, but it had lost its throne. She lifted her chin and met the day without flinching. The afternoon meeting began without sparks, yet its quiet felt like a verdict. Mr. Harris spoke in clipped phrases, eyes sliding past Emily as if frightened of contact. She waited for the blow that never came. The absence of contempt was louder than any insult. Emily thought, "Your approval was the lock I built myself." She sat straighter and let the moment pass without chasing it. Daniel watched the exchange with a patient stillness, as if timing mattered more than noise. Emily said, "We can proceed with the next phase." Her voice carried clean and unforced. The room adjusted to her steadiness and followed. Night wrapped the city in neon threads, and Emily walked through the hum without shrinking. Rain had rinsed the sidewalks clean, and signs shimmered in mirrored puddles. She matched her steps to her breath and let the streets teach her tempo. Emily said, "I will not vanish in the glare." The crowds flowed around her like a river that finally made space. She remembered every shut door and every swallowed word. They no longer felt like proof of her smallness. They felt like training for this pace. She lifted her eyes to a billboard and laughed softly. Her life was not a pitch anymore. It was a vow in motion. Home held a gentler silence now, the kind that listens back. Emily stood before the mirror and let the overhead lamp draw a warm halo on the glass. She traced a fingertip across her reflection, as if signing a contract. Emily said, "You are enough, even when you shake." The words did not demand proof. They offered shelter. She thought of the girl who kept her hand down to avoid the spotlight. She met that memory with a steady smile, and did not look away. The room felt larger without the old echoes. She breathed in, and felt the shape of her future widen. Dawn opened like a quiet promise as Emily stepped onto the street. The air tasted new, bright with cold and possibility. She carried her bag lightly, as if the straps remembered to be kind. Emily said, "This is the first day I choose the light." The sun edged the buildings, and drew long paths for her feet to follow. She did not rush. She matched the city's breath and her own. Old stories tugged at her heels, but they no longer wrote the ending. She smiled, and let them fade into morning traffic. What remained was simple. She walked forward, and did not look back.